Hey there, everyone.
Hello.
So, yeah, I'm sure that you saw yesterday's stream, how fucking awful it was. So I decided that I was gonna stream again today to sort of make up for that. Um, but yeah, in yesterday's case, oh boy, yeah, we just needed better mods. Apparently, you said that you got kicked somehow.
Yeah, yeah,
McToast.
I had a screenshot of that, so
Yeah, so I didn't kick him. In fact, I went back to watch the stream, and when that happened, I was in the middle of talking. So I don't know how that happened, but I mean, we brought you back on to show that there's no hard feelings and that nothing's really going on. I mean, I don't know what to say about that, but
I kind of just thought he left.
yeah, same here.
All right, so where do we start? We're talking about Soygon now.
I mean, we can. We have some other topics coming up, but that's probably the biggest one. Yeah, for somebody who I used to have a lot of respect with, Sargon's kind of fucking up lately, like a lot.
I don't know, like I haven't really been paying attention to Soygon. I haven't watched his videos in a long time. Not just because like I come to disagree with him. I mean, I've been disagreeing with him for as long as I've been watching him, which is fine. It's just like he's become boring. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's the same topics over and over again, and you don't really feel like you're getting much out of it. He did an analysis of the first series of attacks by the US against Syria. I believe it was in 2016, early 2016, and he explained in excruciating detail the factions, who's involved, who's where, who has how many forces. It was like two videos that were an hour long each, and they were fantastic. They were everything you could possibly want to know about that whole conflict right there in an incredibly unbiased and very informative manner. That is exquisite. But he's not making those videos anymore.
Yeah, instead, I think he's gotten his head kind of too far up his own ass, and you can see because, a lot of people have been going around saying that this noticeable decline in with his mentality sort of started back in early 2016 after he was on JF stream with Richard Spencer, which I don't like Richard Spencer, obviously. Um, but yeah, there was a point in that stream where Richard Spencer told Sargon, you're not as smart as you think you are. And then the next day, the liberalist movement was born. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that that really just got under his fucking skin. But I mean, I kind of agree with that. But have you also noticed that recently he's been involving himself more and more with UK party politics? Specifically, he's been trying to associate more with UKIP.
Mm-hmm. I think that has to do with the controversy surrounding what's his name,
Tommy Robinson
uh,
or Dankula.
Dankula. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean he started associating with UKIP, like more so back in like 2016, but he started like really getting involved when Tommy Robinson got arrested. Like I actually pretty distinctly remember he was at like a free speech protest with Nigel Farage, which I mean I still I understand why people protest. It's kind of fun to scream at politicians, but it doesn't accomplish anything. You may as well just be spending your time doing something else that's actually going to accomplish something, like developing FNet, for example.
Or hell, even if you're just like going about your regular business and then just stopping and have a conversation with someone. Hello, do you have a few minutes to hear good news about our Lord and Savior Nigel Farage? That can actually do a lot to inform people.
Oh yeah, and that's another thing. That's a big part of the reason why the party system is so ridiculously toxic and why politicians on both sides will deliberately try and demonize one another. Sometimes they'll go out of their way to go as far as to make themselves look bad so that they can give the other side victories, just if it will encourage more people who are disenfranchised to get back into the system. Because people who are disenfranchised with the political system are extremely dangerous to the state, because what they will do is they can go around like us and spread messages on streams and create things which undermine the state's interests, and that can lead to more people being disenfranchised. That's the reason why the state cares so much about voter participation. Not that voting actually matters or that they think it's critical to the actual system, because as I've demonstrated on numerous occasions, that's simply not true.
The government will just do whatever the hell it wants. And at some point, the growing of people who are disenfranchised is going to become a game of whack-a-mole for the police and for the government. But I repeat myself.
Yeah, it's a lot like the Matrix. It's sort of a Machiavellian system of control, but they can't just keep to themselves. They need you to be in the system. They need you to be controlled in order for their system to perpetuate itself, at least in the psychological aspect.
And perhaps even more insidious is the kind of what's the term? Arresting effect it has on people. So you have Sargon, for example. Like, how many subscribers does he has? Like 750,000?
858 last I checked.
It's actually like getting closer to 900,000 now.
Yeah. Well, figure like only 10% of his audience are active viewers. I don't know the number, but that is still tens of thousands of people who he could easily bring in to understanding natural law, individual liberty, and all sorts of other things that would be incredibly useful and incredibly valued to not only the United Kingdom, but the whole freaking world, to really be that mouthpiece to help enlighten all sorts of people to these wonderful ideas. But instead, he thinks that in order to fix the world, he just needs to work in the system of party politics, where he is going to become nothing, nobody, a footnote in history at best.
Yeah, that's another thing. I've noticed that the people who he's like targeting in his bitch fits are always people who challenge him and his political interests. They'll like Medicare, just basically people who tell him how spurgy he's being for associating with UKIP or thinking that he's actually going to lead a political movement in the UK. That's something that I've noticed, and I think that part of it is his ego, and I think that another part of it is, this is something that I've noticed with a lot of people who previously were like actually good people, like Adam Kokesh. You've seen what's happened with Adam Kokesh recently. He started his political campaign for not president 2020, and now it came out recently that people working for his campaign were trying to obtain the personal information of voluntarist Japan, somebody who was criticizing him on Steemit, and was trying to basically like threaten his children, and like they made it explicitly clear they were targeting his kids, and they meant harm to him. It came out that they were trying to hire a group of like black hat hackers to get this information, and they were going to hire like a hitman or something.
Jesus, I didn't know anything about this.
Oh, Larkin Rose made a video about it. But yeah, that's something that I've noticed. I've become convinced that once you get involved in politics, you have to by necessity become a psychopath, because your actions and their actual effects on the world, you begin to disassociate your actions with what actual effects they have on the world, and that leads to a person developing psychopathic tendencies where they feel like they can do anything and they're not going to have consequences because they aren't actually observing firsthand the consequences of their actions.
I think that's generalized a bit too much, but
Well, have you? I'm assuming everyone here has read Machiavelli, The Prince.
Yeah, Il Principe.
And it's pretty clear that in order to be a successful politician, at least according to Machiavelli's point of view, you have to become a sociopath. You have to become like just the most ruthless son of a bitch you could possibly imagine. And that's just if you want to hold on to power or maintain it. So
Right.
it's
And that
he's
I think that's partly what's happening. That's what's driving Sargon to these lengths right now. I think that it's because these people are challenging his interests and his career in politics, and he's gotten a little taste of that. He's gotten a little taste of being associated with parties and trying to affect legislation in the UK. I mean, he's not in Parliament, of course, but that's like it's pretty obvious that's what he's aiming for. I mean, I think he's explicitly said that that's one of the things that he aspires to do. So I think that that's another aspect of what's happened. Now, you could look at that on the flip side as well, if he were actually deeper into the party system. I'm not entirely convinced that this is the case, but like if he actually was a member of UK, if he was in the UK Parliament, I would be thinking that he's doing this deliberately to try and convince more people that UKIP is a threat, so that they would become Tories or Labour just to try and stop him.
or
That's
the
I mean
the
that's sort of
inverse. The inverse could also be true. Sorry to interrupt, but if you present UKIP as a threat, something that's dangerous, you also give them a rather frightening allure, kind of a forbidden fruit sort of feel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what exactly is going on, but you've got um him running doxing ops on people. You've got him like it's just like it's as if you took what happened with Kraut and T and Mundane Matt and you threw them into a blender. That's sort of what's going on here with Sargon, and that's why I titled the stream Sargon Hunts for Boulders.
I still don't understand the Boulders reference,
I mean,
but
you've got him straight up lying to people's face, saying that he's not flagging them, but then videos come up. People are accusing him of flagging them because there are these two Twitter accounts which Sargon claims aren't his. And then it comes out he was on some streams and he admits on those streams that those are his accounts, not underscore Sargon1. And fuck, I'm trying to remember. I don't really remember the name of the other one off the top of my head, but that's not really that important. So he is like flagging people, and then he's lying about it, and he gets called out. Except unlike Mundane Matt, he doesn't even admit it once he gets called out beyond a reasonable doubt to where it's him anymore. And he runs these Discord ops, doxing people like he apparently got Mr. Medicare's dox. I mean, it's just like those two situations rolled into one, isn't it? And that's where I'm starting to like have doubts as to if this was just Sargon being autistic, or if this was actually just if this was like a manufactured controversy, because it is eerie, the similarities between those two dramas, those chapters of drama on the internet.
I don't understand why Sargon would need to manufacture drama to, I don't know, promote his channel, give himself some kind of a edgy allure. He's the biggest skeptic. Why would he need it?
Well, if he's trying to promulgate an idea, then a larger audience allows him to do that.
Yeah, that's
the Machiavellian thing. The ends justify the means, don't they?
Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced that this is just Sargon being a spurg. I think that he's doing this for an unforeseen reason, and I think that it's pretty easy to speculate as to why. I mean, politicians have been doing this for decades. It's called problem reaction solution, and he's recently involved himself in UK party politics pretty deeply, at least in the UKIP party. So it would seem reasonable to suspect that he started utilizing tactics that people are telling him about in UK party politics.
That sounds. How many how many potential UKIP voters or fence sitters would even be aware of this internet trauma?
Well, a lot of them are fans of Sargon. In fact, Sargon, there's at least a decent case to be made that UKIP became popular because of Sargon, Dankula, Paul Joseph Watson, and Tommy Robinson. I mean, Nigel Farage too, but yeah.
It may be of interest. He was also doing some interviews with BBC, and I think there's another one, radio interview. So it's possible that his ideas are escaping more of the internet culture and going more towards mainstream media outlets.
Interesting.
Right, and that's another thing. I mean, that's another aspect which would lead one to suspect that that's why he's doing these freaking autistic Discord ops, is because yeah, he's starting to utilize their tactics because he's starting to drift more towards their world, their framework.
And he needs to appeal to their sensibilities and points of view. There's a saying that goes around called a pound of flesh, where everybody takes shots at each other, and it's basically just assumed that they'll punch each other in the face and then go home and have a spot of tea.
But okay, but yeah, there are two last things I want to say about Sargon before we get on to an actual topic. For one, did you see that? Did either of you guys see that stream that he did with Christy Winters and Kevin Logan yesterday?
Yes, actually. It was absolutely freaking hilarious.
That was so bad. I actually like physically cringed watching that because I mean I was just thinking, holy shit. I mean, if this is an ego thing, I mean, Richard Spencer back in like January drove him to this, and now, I mean, Christy Winters and Kevin Logan, he spent the better parts of like 2015 shitting on these people, and now he gets on a stream with them and gets his ass absolutely fucking handed to him, because he came on there for literally no fucking reason to talk about something he doesn't know anything about. I mean, I think that if it is an ego thing, it's only going to go downhill from here. If you think this is rock bottom, you are gravely mistaken.
Well, I mean, it's a long way to the bottom from where he was. I wonder who will crush. I wonder if he'll say hi to Minnesota Burns for us.
Yeah, I wonder what the bottom actually is from him, because I think that he's just going to continue falling. I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
I think the bottom. Sorry.
Okay. No, you go ahead.
I think the bottom looks like what's it called? Feminist Frequency, a channel with millions of subs, but only gets like hundreds of views a video.
It's funny as shit. But yeah, no, I mean, if you look at how he just talks about intellectual topics anymore that aren't associated with his drama, it's just fucking pathetic. And I've been talking about this in the videos that I actually do mention Sargon. I mean, have you seen how he tries to talk about libertarianism, specifically in relation to the social media debate? Because I got to admit, before these gay ops that he's running, that's where I lost respect for Sargon. Is because it became immediately clear to me the moment that he started pushing for this internet Bill of Rights that he was not being intellectually honest. He was doing that for for the motivation of party politics to try and get votes for UKIP.
Mm-hmm. This is completely different from what he used to do, where he would at least make the effort to understand a person's point of view before debunking it.
Because it does not matter how many fucking times you tell him, hey, the government has think tanks which are controlling Facebook. On record, the Atlantic Council, for example, they're subsidizing these companies to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. Peter Thiel is a CIA asset, and he runs a large part of Amazon and Google. So, and you've also, on top of that, you've got all these regulations in countries like in Germany that these big social media companies have to follow, which you know, has an effect on their practices. So so just, I mean, you can tell that this is not to argue at this point that this is a problem with a lack of regulation is just absurd. But it doesn't matter how many times you point that out to him. He's responded to me rather directly. One of my videos on the subject, I could tell because that's another thing, but I'll get to that in a second. But it doesn't matter how many times you say it to him. He's just gonna continue going in circles and pretending, lying about our position. Oh, you guys are just fine with everything being the way it is. You don't want the structure of the internet to change. I mean, FNet doesn't exist. You guys just think everybody should be censored because you're a bunch of corporate bootlickers. His words, not mine.
I'm sorry, which corporations have I defended again?
Yeah, I mean, it's so ridiculous. One of the things libertarians complain about more than the government are corporatists.
We spend basically the other half of our time talking about how corporatism is actually the worst thing.
No, there's an arguable case to be there's a case to be made that just if looking at it from truly a pragmatic perspective, that corporatism is the worst part of statism. That is the single aspect which makes statism so unbearable, because that's the aspect which keeps people from actually obtaining more resources for themselves and actually establishing their own businesses and establishing a prosperous livelihood for themselves.
Well, is ours a pragmatic position or an ethical position?
I actually specifically said from a pragmatic position.
Well, right, but what is our
if we're talking about the ethical position, then it's not really possible to make a consistent argument for one part of statism being necessarily worse than the other, because everything that the state does stems from the exact same set of principles, which are demonstrably unethical from their roots. So, like,
well, their goals are different.
What do you mean by that? Like, please specify.
Well, what is a corporatist goal compared to a government's goal?
Well, the government has its own goals for why it even works with the corporatists to begin with. But yeah, the corporatists' goal is to basically establish a monopoly on the market so they don't have to compete. That's pretty obvious. But the government's goal for establishing corporatist institutions is to, one, have stronger control over their land's commerce, and also as a way to control sort of who actually exists on the upper echelons of society.
I think we can get a little more fundamental than that, but that might be a discussion for another time.
Probably.
I mean, I actually was thinking about making a video specifically regarding corporatism, because that's That's something admittedly libertarians sort of just assume everybody um would understand if you explain to them, well, that's not a problem with the market, that's corporatism. But I mean, it genuinely seems like Marxists and social democrats don't understand the actual economic effects that a company being subsidized by the state um, would have on the company in question, as asinine as that may be.
Well, I mean, in my Patreon Q&A, someone asked what the most infuriating thing that corporatists, not corporatists, that Marxists, socialists, and generally people I disagree with get about my position, and that is the belief that I have to somehow defend corporatism, because everything that the government does can be attributed to capitalism in some strange way.
Yeah, it's really strange. I get a lot of people, the people who actually do disagree with my videos. For some reason, they assume that I would defend the current system as it exists in the U.S.
I think it's normalcy bias.
Yeah, no, I think that the U.S. honestly is one of the worst governments maybe in history. I'm being serious too, by the way. If you guys want me to make a video on that, I totally will, because I have a pretty strong case to make for that to be the case.
Let's.
I mean, at least North Korea, you know, they keep to themselves. I mean, they treat their people fucking horribly, but we have military bases in every single country in the entire fucking world. Most people can't even name, like, we can't even name most of the countries we have military bases in. Like, the average person couldn't. So, I mean, I can go way more into detail, but
I'm looking up how many countries does the U.S. have military bases in.
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a country we don't.
I mean, I'm trying to think. Not think, I'm looking it up. It's around 130, at least if this article from PolitiFact is correct.
Somebody asks in chat, don't patents lead to innovation? No, patents don't lead to innovation. That's a form of monopolization that was actually established in feudal governments originally. It was a way to try and curb press, which was critical of the government. Originally, patents, they were called guilds originally, and the very first guild was a news press guild, and it was established in Britain in the early 1600s by Queen Elizabeth I, I think.
Patents do create incentives for innovation, but they don't lead to innovation in and of themselves.
You'll have to explain that one to me.
The market would be way more innovative without patents, because you would have a more competitive market.
Oh, sure, that's the position I hold, but we can't ignore that patents and I forget the other form. There's
copyright.
There's another form of regulations that governments can go through to lead to innovation. But it's.
Let's stick with patents for now.
Sure. Patents do lead to a perverse incentive, but it is an incentive towards innovation.
I'm sorry, you'll have to explain that one to me.
A perverse incentive is an incentive which does not achieve a desired goal and instead goes against that goal.
I mean, not explain the definition of a perverse incentive. I mean, explain how patent leads to or incentivizes innovation.
Well, sure. So if an inventor is given the reward of monopolization over an idea, then that is much more valuable to them than the free market outcome. So your reward becomes greater. Therefore, your input materials, your costs are outweighed by that benefit.
But isn't that a natural aspect of monopoly? Not monopoly, but innovation. I mean, for example, when Apple produced the first iPhones, they had a monopoly on the smartphone market.
Yeah.
A temporary one until knockoffs came out, but one nonetheless.
Again,
But how would that
the markets
produce more?
can have incentives for innovation, and
But-
governments do provide the same incentive.
No, that at
over time
best that
becomes
would just
perverse.
at best all that does is create a new incentive for corporatists, but that doesn't make the market more innovative.
It actually makes the market less innovative because a patent prevents the creation of knockoffs, of spin-offs, of reverse engineering. I mean, Samsung as a corporation started out because they took apart TV and built it back together.
I think it's also fair to say that the patents have created new ways of innovation around patents themselves. So I don't think it's fair just to say that they don't work.
Well, it's not that they don't.
Not only that, but the creation of new ideas is spurred on more by patents than otherwise. Again, it's unethical to do so, and I don't think it should be done because it creates perverse incentives. But we can't just ignore how governments operate.
I don't see how it creates incentives beyond things which already exist. I mean, you have patents which prevent people from developing on these ideas even more for 17 years.
And the incentive to innovate doesn't come from patents. It comes from competition within the market. It comes from one company wanting to create something which is better than something that any other company could possibly produce.
Right, and if you can attain a patent, that's something that another company can't produce. So that is that is the innovation that's being created, or that is the incentive that's being created. Sorry.
There's also the abuse of the patent system.
Even now, Apple created the iPhone. Then immediately after, all the other tech companies just created similar products. It's not really stopping. It's not really affecting. It's not really improving innovation. It just makes it so other companies can't be as innovative.
Do we consider other smartphones to be homogeneous goods compared to the iPhone?
Well, that's something for the government to decide, isn't it?
Well, no, we can decide that. We're
pretty much the only difference that it makes between them. Some of them are better than the iPhone. Some of them have, but I mean, they have different app stores. And if it wasn't for patents, developers would have more incentive to innovate with their apps that they create for the App Store, and these companies would be able to add more things to their smartphones. So it does actually hinder innovation.
Well, let's consider the smartphone then. Consider for a moment that smartphones are homogeneous goods with the exception of the operating systems. Is that fair?
Sure. Sorry, I was reading the chat for a second.
Did you get my premise?
Maybe you could repeat it.
Consider for a moment that smartphones are homogeneous with the exceptions of operating systems.
I mean,
what function do they serve?
By homogeneous?
They're homogeneous goods.
I'm not entirely sure what that means.
That's not.
Well, homogeneous.
I mean, I know what the word. That's a bit of a broad thing to say.
Well, no, it's something you use in econ quite often. Is if you know that a good is homogeneous, you can view the market of homogeneous goods as being not necessarily lacking innovation, but it's as innovative or as efficient as it can be, which isn't necessarily always true, but it does show that even if you have an oligopolistic market, that it is in some sense competitive.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why, of course, that's why competition exists in the limited state that it does, even in our corporatist society today. But that's not to say that we couldn't have a more innovative and a more competitive market with even lower profits, with lower prices with better profit margins.
Well, sure. Then the issue lies with not how the smartphones themselves are patented, but with how the operating systems are. Right. Both of them, I think, should be removed. That would be preferable. But we can't say that.
That's the point that I'm. That's the point that I'm
generalizing the
making,
effect
that,
of the
patenting. It produces problems with innovation for operating systems and app developers.
Oh, right, but you are considering the smartphone itself with the case of early Apple, and that's a case of the market not being able to compete as far as manufacturing their own smartphones. What I'm getting at is I don't think it's fair to generalize the effects of state regulation in the way that you're doing it.
Well, all state regulation, it does two things. It makes production more expensive, or it makes products more scarce. Generally, they're generally the same.
Well,
but
that's not necessarily true, because different markets exist in the. Are you familiar with the field of microeconomics?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Generally, it's concerned with a specific good or a specific household and their purchasing habits. If you consider each specific good, we can't generalize, once again, that governments always make things more expensive or more scarce. They can subsidize things as well.
Well, that just means that the scarcity is being pushed somewhere else.
Well, sure.
Okay.
You can't say that it's being made scarce or that it's being made more expensive.
Yeah, you can. Well, it's just that it's being pushed somewhere else.
There are also regulations which do nothing more than optimize utility, which is what I was getting into yesterday. And those come in the form of Pigouvian taxes and subsidies, among a few other.
Well, that's the problem, though, is that because regulation only establishes monopolies, makes products more scarce, and makes commodities needlessly more expensive, how can you possibly produce more utility with regulations? And that's
because
that's how I challenged that yesterday, is through regulation or taxes, the only thing that you would ever be able to accomplish through something the government produced would be, at best, as good as a private producer could produce it.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because of certain externalities which can't be internalized without a fully. Consider the difference between socially optimized utility and market equilibrium utility.
You'll have to give a specific example, please.
Sure. Do you mind if I use a hypothetical?
Sure.
Okay. So
we're getting way off topic here, but
let's take a perfectly competitive market for, let's say, paper production. Okay. Now, this specific form of paper production is efficient because it's done in a perfectly competitive market. However, it causes an externality of, let's say, pollution. Okay. It creates carbon dioxide, or it dumps things into water that we don't want dumped into water, etc. Now, an individual who lives near the factory, they might purchase the paper, but let's consider for a moment that they don't purchase the paper. We would say that any air pollution or any water pollution that they have to deal with the costs of is an externality because they're not involved within that market. Now, the aggregate market will demand a certain point at which will become the market equilibrium price. It's where supply and demand meet. Now,
we're a bit off. Sorry to interrupt, but we are a bit off topic.
Yeah, we were actually going to get on to a couple different stories, but I'm actually kind of glad you did bring that up. I mean, did you have anything more significant to provide in that example?
Yeah, I was going to go over the difference between a socially optimized utility point and the market equilibrium utility point. In many cases, the socially optimized point will actually provide more of a surplus of utility than the market outcome.
I'm kind of glad that you brought that up. I mean, maybe Filthy, you have a critique of that, but from an economic standpoint. But all I could think of was somebody mentioning that during the environmental section of that debate that I had yesterday, that I didn't mention in a stateless society, pollution would be an initiation of force, and you could, if somebody polluted your property, you could have a dispute with them over it.
Well, consider this:
So I wanted to mention that really quick.
are aesthetics a form of aggression?
Are aesthetics a form of aggression? Well,
Right.
you're just
If there's an aesthetic that
well,
you
no,
don't,
but you're destroying somebody else's property with the intent to do so. So that's a form of aggression.
no. So consider for a moment that the externality is no longer pollution. Let's say that the factory is lowering house value because nobody wants to live there. It doesn't look nice. What you're doing is you're imposing a cost of utility upon someone who's not involved in that market.
Okay, but that's not an initiation of force.
No, that's what I'm saying is it's not an initiation of force. So if our goal is to be pragmatic here, then shouldn't we be maximizing utility? There's nothing this is why
that's bad. So that would be quickly innovated out of the market. The only reason we even have paper mill pollution as is because innovation has been hindered by regulations.
Well, again, it doesn't matter whether or not the market's still going to demand a certain amount of paper.
I mean, a big part of the problem here is that you're speaking in a lot of vagary. So, I mean, when you say socially optimized utility, that's like 10 to 100 different things you could be referencing there.
Well, no,
that's the problem with the concept of socially social utility, really, because utility is a very individualistic concept.
Are you familiar with
it's not something that a collective can possess. It's something that can be utilized by the individual is necessarily unique to an individual. So the concept of a social utility sort of doesn't make sense.
Well, you fundamentally don't understand the term then. Social utility is just the measurement of utility for society latissime. It's the measure.
That's literally exactly what I just said.
No. It's the aggregate utility of each individual. It's not of the society itself because that's not an individual.
It's you just said that it was for the society. Now you're saying that it's not for the society.
The utility.
What was that?
It is aggregate utility.
Well, yeah, you just described it as being a way to measure society's utility and the individual's utility, and that necessarily contradicts itself.
Right, society
is a contradictory concept.
Hey, can we get back to the
topics? Well, hold on. Are you familiar with Coase theorem?
With what?
Coase theorem.
Elaborate.
Coase's theorem. Are you familiar with it?
That's why I asked you to elaborate, because no, not specifically.
Then I highly recommend that you do some reading on that before you start talking about what socially optimized utility and the market optimized utility is, because it's quite clear on what those are.
Well, I will read into Coase's theorem, but I'm telling you right now that social utility itself is an absurd concept, kind of like the labor theory of value.
It's part of fundamental economics. That's why I'm confused as to why you think this is some vague term, because this is commonly used in both in practice and in theory.
I've never heard of it. Maybe that's my fault, but it's not a term I've ever encountered before up to now.
I'll get you guys some links.
Yes, that would be appreciated. Can we get back to the articles?
Well, again, utility is, yeah, we'll get to the articles, but I'd have to challenge that, because utility is necessarily an individualist conception, something that the individual necessarily externalizes onto each specific product. So how do you have a social measurement of utility? But yeah, we'll get to some of the articles. So which one do you want to start with? Because I mean, all of the ones that we've been circling around are pretty great. We have this one article. I guess I could share my screen because you guys got to see this. This is hilarious. Just a second here. Cryptocurrencies have failed and blockchain has yet to be proven useful.
Oh yes, this story is absolutely hilarious. You ever see those stories? Well, have you ever read an article that contradicts itself in the same paragraph?
Yeah, this is one of those. But I mean, you remember last week how they were saying that governments were utilizing blockchain on the stream that we did to
Yeah,
tax people. That was the propaganda that they're using. Well, now they're going the exact opposite route. I mean, within the exact same week, governments are using it to try and tax people. It's actually just one giant tax scheme. Also, it's not going to work because governments can't tax it.
well, my personal favorite part of this article is that he lists three aspects of a currency that is absolutely necessary. The first one being that I believe it's like a store of it's that it's exchanged. And he said that, well, you'd see the number of people who actually exchange in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies is extremely small. So therefore, it's not really used as exchange. Now, let me explain all the places where it is used as an exchange.
Yeah, it's right. It's right here. Uh, the textbook definition of money stipulates three criteria. It must be able to serve as a medium of exchange, a storage of value, and a unit of account. And then he goes on to list several areas in which it's exchanged pretty commonly. And you remember, like, for the last couple of months, I know as a matter of fact, on the last few Cool Capitalist Kids stream, Filthy and I have said that once the state actually starts trying to go after crypto anarchists, which this article mentions basically, they mention agorists specifically. They say basically that now the propaganda line that they're pushing is that it's because libertarians that blockchain is becoming so prominent. The only people who are trading in blockchain are libertarians, and
Well,
it's in some sort, and they say that it's a utopian idea, of course.
well, that's not projection at all. Well, I mean, it's
Well,
not
no,
going to be.
and then they go on, and then this guy goes on to explain how it's used to trade around the government and why it's dangerous because it can't be taxed. Also, it's utopian that this will ever undermine the state.
Can you scroll down a little bit? Yeah, right there. I think it's hilarious that see that ad, Forbes Asia, decrypting blockchain for business.
Oh yeah, that's a conference that's apparently going to happen on December 4th. We may have to do a response to that when it happens. I mean, because you guys really seem to love streams on my channel. At least my audience seems to really love streams. So yeah, we may have to do that. What do you think,
Or
Vilvi?
we can, attend the thing and watch it live and then stream that. I don't know. It might be either interesting. It could just be business tips for adapting new technology and being completely innocuous, or it could be hilarious propaganda, in which case we win either way.
Yeah, it's given how Forbes is talking about it and how Forbes is hosting this, I'm kind of convinced it's going to be propaganda, which is why I'm sort of interested in live streaming it.
And I love this paragraph right here. If cryptocurrency as a specific application of the blockchain technology has been a spectacular failure, what then of blockchain itself? Once we unbundle the package of blockchain and cryptocurrency, we are then back to the first pattern of, technology commercialization. And it basically goes into talk about, oh, not enough people are using crypto or not enough people are using blockchain, so therefore it's a commercial failure. Even though blockchain is basically where the internet was in 1990, where you have this wonderful new technology and people are just trying to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, and the market's vastly expanding every year. Now it's like $1.2 billion, at least last time I checked, are traded in China's crypto market actively. They have like 2 websites which trade crypto, and they trade $1.2 billion across all cryptocurrencies on a daily basis. There are entire cities in Russia which trade in nothing but cryptocurrency. I
I'm
mean,
gonna go there.
Yeah, they're mainly farming communities. But as for this article, you could see some of the credentials that the author of this article lists for himself. Academic Advisory Council at MasterCard. So this is a conflict of interest. This is pure propaganda being disguised as journalism.
I'm sorry, but why does MasterCard have an academic advisory council? Is there a MasterCard university that I'm not aware of? What's going on here? McToast, do you know anything about MasterCard University? Have you considered attending?
No, currently I'm attending different forms of study. Lecturing.
Okay. All right. But yeah, as you said, it's a very clear conflict of interest. Someone who works at a corporation, which is almost certainly subsidized by the state, gaining enormous or has a lot to lose by the rise of cryptocurrency. So naturally, you got to quash that as quickly as possible, which of course they won't, because at this point it's unstoppable. It's only libertarians and crypto anarchists who are using cryptocurrency now.
Oh yeah,
but
it's a utopian pipe dream. The state will never be abolished by it. Also, it's dangerous and it's unstable.
And let's not also forget it's used by
taxed.
It's only usable by drug dealers and terrorists.
Yeah, that's the thing. We predicted that was specifically going to be the propaganda line. Like, we'll have to like go back at some of our earlier streams and look for it. A couple of streams, I specifically remember you and I saying that once agorists actually started like becoming a big problem for the state, like once we got closer to the establishment of a mainstream consistent counter economy, they were going to start attacking agorists, and that was going to be the line that they toted when they attacked agorists, was that we were a bunch of drug dealers and terrorists. And here they are, using that exact same line almost word for word.
It's so obvious that the freaking infographics show predicted it. In their video, what would happen if people stopped paying taxes? They said that people who would want to avoid paying taxes would be labeled as terrorists. While they weren't referencing cryptocurrency specifically, like at all, it's very clear that cryptocurrency as a form of tax avoidance would definitely cause the government to label people who use cryptocurrency as terrorists for reasons. But
and
if you want to find...
it's only going to start getting more absurd from here. And you can tell that they're panicking about the nonsensical and the Orwellian doublethink that goes on in writing these articles. Like, literally paragraph to paragraph. Oh, it'll never catch on. It's utopian. We'll just laugh at these people. Oh, it's a threat to the state because transactions can't be monitored. Oh, and then in another article published the exact same week, another mainstream outlet says that it's being utilized as a tax scheme by the government to try and catch tax evaders.
I think what they're trying to do is, well, obviously they're trying to scare people, but the Taiwanese article implies
Yeah,
that implies that the blockchain is like this dome that you can't see what's inside of it. And by the government adapting blockchain technology into its tax system, that the government has entered this dome and is now able to monitor what's going on, even
which
though isn't possible.
which is hilarious because they'll also turn around and say, "Oh no, we can track blockchain." That's Vice made that documentary with that guy claiming that he was a blockchain developer. Then you can look up his name and find that he's a blogger who advocates for regulating cryptocurrency and talks about how dangerous it is.
Well, of course it's dangerous to him. He's a statist.
Yeah, but that's my point is in a relatively short period of time, they flip back and forth constantly with absolutely seemingly no self-awareness. I mean, it's clearly they're losing their minds over it. I mean, we are actually seeing the media lose its mind.
And there's not a damn thing that they can do about it.
And that's why they're losing their mind, is because they know absolutely nothing's going to happen about it.
Pretty much.
People are going to continue trading. The counter economy is going to continue getting stronger, and all they can do essentially is kick and stream. Same thing with the government.
And don't U.S. farmers also use cryptocurrency a lot? Like I know
Yeah,
they're getting killed by Trump's tariffs.
yeah. After the our tariffs, a lot of farmers started using Litecoin specifically was the big one.
Yeah, well, one of my predictions that I made in the what would really happen if people stopped paying taxes video, where I also predicted that the government would use a narrative of drug dealers and terrorists being the one who used cryptocurrency. I said that there will come a point where people will engage in a counter economy, not because they're libertarians, not because it's any ideological purpose or they want to avoid taxes, but because it's the only place where they can buy the products, goods, and services that they freaking need to survive.
At a price which is actually affordable to them that they'd be willing to pay.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be the only way to get it.
I mean, that's how it's going to start. I don't think it's going to start with a full collapse, causing people to trade. But I mean, we've seen with the recent big hits that the international investment markets, stock markets, have taken in recent weeks, like that about 3 weeks ago, that one day where they lost $9 trillion, the global stock markets, and the US dollar dropped a little bit. Yeah, in that period of time, every cryptocurrency in the across the markets gained in value. It was the only commodity which actually um, across every single one in the entire industry actually gained value.
Well, that's because it's a substitute good.
And that's something that I've been saying for a long time, and that's how I think that a declining market will actually be the state's undoing, which fortunately for us, the state is fundamentally unsustainable, so it's really only a matter of time. But as people see their assets being liquefied by whatever coming market crash or recession is about to happen, they're going to start buying a bunch of cryptocurrency to preserve the value of the assets that they have. And in doing so, the value of these cryptocurrencies is going to skyrocket since their value is proportionate to the active trading that occurs within the blockchain. And as its value increases from this increased demand, that'll only encourage more people who otherwise aren't trying to preserve their assets to start trading in the crypto market.
Yeah, also, by the way, guys, buy gold and silver because that'll be incredibly useful come the market crash.
Not anywhere near as useful as any of the various cryptocurrencies will be. I mean, gold and silver, yeah, they'll preserve your assets, but with cryptocurrency, you'll actually gain money.
It's a way to future-proof yourself. I would recommend
Alright.
getting both, but yeah. Anyways, I think this is time to wrap up the stream.
Yeah. Glad to have you on, Miktos. Yeah, sorry about whatever the hell happened yesterday, but I mean you're a smart and nice guy, so
Yeah,
like
thanks for having
I
me.
like talking with you. You can come on the Cool Capitalist Kids stream tomorrow too if you like.
Yeah, by all means.
Depending on the time, I will either be lecturing or I'll be working with another man on the theory.
It'll be
Alright.
same time tomorrow.
Okay.
All
I'll
right.
my schedule.
Okay, sounds good. All
Yep,
right, so
so I'll see you all next time. I'm gonna start working on a video after this stream ends. It's been about 2 days, the same amount of time that I usually start working on a video, but I've been streaming the last few days, so it seems like it's been a lot longer. All right. Well, I'll see you all next time.
see ya.